Welcome back to Off the Shelf Book Talk with Book Lovers. I'm Elizabeth Nelson here with Kay Johnson. And Kay, what have you been reading this time?
Well, first, before we even go there, we're going to talk about, this is our 50th program. Who knew we would last 50? We've survived a pandemic. Mm-hmm. We've survived a baby. We've survived just access to books because of the library having all sorts of different approaches to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So on that note, we will dive in, but I just wanted to thank all of our dedicated readers who watch us, that this is number 50, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
So if you want to know what I'm reading.
Always.
For people who know me, they know that I have few hobbies, but one of them is genealogy.
Yes.
And so somehow, and I was trying to figure this out while I was driving here, because I was going to talk about this book, but somehow I found something called the Lovettsville Historical Society.
Okay.
And it's in Loudoun, Virginia.
Okay.
Which is just a hop, skip, and a jump from Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And anyway, what's interesting about it is my mother, your grandmother's family, the paternal line, was there. That's where they settled. There's the Householder Road, and the Householder family house is still there, which is sort of interesting. Yeah. But what was really interesting about it is that for July 4th, last year, I believe, they recognized 5 Revolutionary War patriots. Okay. One of them was our direct descendant, Adam Householder.
Okay.
Which is interesting. And so one of my things my mother has always said is her maiden name was Householder, and she said there's no householders here. Well, that's because they're all in the East Coast. In Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, which is a town of 600, there are 39 householders. And so, to make a long story short, there's a book that I'm reading now called Between Reb and Yank. Mm-hmm. And it's by Taylor Chamberlain and John Saunders. Okay. And it's a history of the Civil War of northern Loudoun County, Virginia. Okay. And what's interesting about it is that it was split between Union and Confederate. Okay. And so when the Union came through, the local Union folks did well. And when the Confederates came through, the rebels did well. And so they'd flip back and forth because of their location. Okay. And this book talks about the whole span of the war, from before it starting and people's loyalties till the end of the war. And what was interesting about it is that the county at that time was run by 4 administrators, and they're elected. And anyway, when they voted them in about right before the war started, they pushed hard for 4 rebels. And they did not get it. They got 2 Union guys, and they tried to get them kicked out, but it didn't work. So politics were dirty in 1860 as well as in 2020. So
some things don't change.
Yes, but the interesting thing about it is that Gideon Householder, which is a descendant, was one of the 4.
Okay.
And so he was there in the heart of the battles and everything going on in that county during the whole Civil War.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the book's been very interesting because of all the things behind the scenes. Okay. Because when you read history about the Civil War, depending on what book you're reading, it's very battle-based and some economics and different things. But this is really interesting because you get to know the characters because there aren't that many in that county.
Yeah.
So if you do have an interest in the Civil War and you have an interest in wanting to study a very small area that was rebel and Union, that really was kind of a microcosm of the whole war. This is a really good book. And when I saw it listed, I thought, it's going to be sort of a personal history and who wants to read it. But I read some of the comments on Amazon, and they were like, this is a remarkably good book. Several people said, and I thought, okay. And I have to say that it is good. And it's like 12,000. I mean, it's a huge book. I'm about a third of the way through,
Okay.
and I had to quit because I was sort of like, okay, who is that now? And but so if you have an interest in the Civil War, Between Breb and Yank is one I would recommend, and
Okay.
that's what it looks like, the cover.
Oh, cool.
So what are you reading, Elizabeth? I'm sure something much lighter and more
Yes,
fun.
much later. I read This Time Next Year by Sophie Cousins, and this is my New Year book.
Okay.
It takes place. So the two main characters in this book, you have Quinn and Minnie, and Quinn and Minnie were both New Year's babies,
Okay.
but Quinn was born 5 minutes before Minnie, so he was the first baby of 1990 and won the $50,000 award for being this first baby. And so ever since, and they've never met, but ever since then, Minnie feels that her birthday is unlucky and terrible things happen to her on her birthday. And the book starts out where she's going with her then boyfriend to a party, and she gets locked in the bathroom and he forgets about her and leaves. So following all these terrible things, and the guy that lets her out the next morning turns out to be Quinn. And so they finally meet, and so then the book is them meeting and getting to know each other with snippets of back to other birthdays, and how it's interesting because they sort of overlap without you realizing it unless you kind of read the little Easter eggs that are kind of put throughout. Like he's talking when he's young, he's in this like Star Wars forum, and there's another person on who's looking for the instructions to the Lego Millennium Falcon because she has all the pieces, but her dad got it secondhand, so she doesn't have the booklet for it. And then in the next time you see Quinn's gone back home and she's cleaning stuff out, it talks about a half-built Millennium Falcon Lego piece in this box, and so you're like, oh, so you kind of start to connect that they've sort of been interacting throughout their lives without even knowing it. But it was cute. It was a cute book, and I enjoyed it. It was kind of a nice, easy way to start the new year, which was good. And Sophie, I don't remember, I'll have to look it up here quick. She has a new book that just came out too, called Just Haven't Met You Yet, which is, I think, it's picking up the wrong suitcase.
Oh yeah, I think I got something on that.
So it's the two of them, and I think they take each other's suitcases. But I saw it the other day at Target, and I was like, oh, I want to get that. And then I was like, no, I'll get in trouble if I get another book.
Oh, Tom will get over it.
Maybe eventually he will. What else are you looking up what else you've read?
No, you go ahead if you've got
Okay.
them right at your fingertips.
I'm currently, so on one of the last episodes, I talked about a book I read called The Lady's Guide to Mischief and Mayhem.
Right.
Well, there is a sequel out to it now that I'm reading, and it's called An Heiress's Guide to Deception and Desire. So this book follows two supporting characters from the first book, Carolyn and Valentine are their names. And at the beginning of the book, one of her friends, who's an actress, is kidnapped. And she happens to be the fiance of one of his cousins.
Okay.
So right now, at this point in the book, they're trying to figure out what happened to her and who's involved. And Caroline and Valentine were engaged at one point, and it ended badly. So she is very passive aggressive, and he just is kind of trying to fix things, but doesn't know how to fix it and keeps putting foot in mouth in major ways. So I'm about halfway through it now, and I like Amanda Collins is the author, and I just kind of like her writing, and it gives you that kind of Edwardian charm, England.
Yeah, I like that.
But it's still like the women are more, have gumption to them. Like her friend Catherine owns a newspaper, and that she got after her husband died, and they write an article together called A Lady's Guide to Mischief and Mayhem. And originally it was talking about different crimes in the area, and it's mostly talking about things women can do to keep themselves safe in this changing world, which is kind of interesting. But I mean, the characters are real kind of gung-ho, and Carolyn wrote, her father owns a tinned food company, so like canned food that's just starting out then. And so she wrote a cookbook on how to cook with all the canned food for everybody. So she's trying to become her own woman as well. But I think it's going to be really good, and I'm enjoying it so far. It kind of reads like a cousin to a Bridgerton book, but not
Okay.
quite as steamy, I'll say.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that, no. What else have you been reading?
Well, I am, I realize as I look at my books that I deleted all the books I've read. And,
Well, that's not good.
well, it's not good when you're supposed to be talking about them.
No, not really. You're going to have to remember them all, Kay.
Yeah, well, the one that I thought was interesting is if you've been following the news, Elizabeth Holmes, the woman who founded
Theranos.
was on trial for fraud and investment fraud and all sorts of things, and they nailed her on 4 counts, I think, and
4 or 5, yeah.
yeah, and then 3 they couldn't decide on or something. But there's a really good book called Bad Blood.
That's a great book.
Yeah, and it really tells the story of Elizabeth Holmes and this whole company. And what I really liked about the book is she was a wonder child. You know, I mean, she was on every cover, Fortune. She raised over $1 billion from all these
Middle-aged and older men.
mostly older men. And in fact, her board of directors had people like Kissinger on it, Schultz, who served as, I forget which, maybe under Bush, all sorts of heavyweights who really weren't science people, and they liked a pretty girl, I think. So nobody asked the hard questions. And so the guy who wrote this book, John Carreyrou, was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, yeah.
And he started asking questions, and he found a whistleblower. And the interesting thing, I was interested in her a long time ago because I really liked the idea that they could take a drop of blood and run like 200 tests with this machine, rather than if you've ever had a full blood profile done, you get they take 15 vials of blood, and my blood clots up really fast, and so I look like a pincushion if they can get that much out. And so it intrigued me.
Yeah.
And so, but in the book it tells you that the machine never worked and that they actually had people doing traditional tests behind the scenes to propagate her
lie.
Yeah. And it's a fascinating book, and I found it very, very interesting. There's an HBO special too that I highly recommend.
Yeah, and there are a couple of podcasts that have been done recently too that were really good. I'll have to look up the
It's
name
just
of
a
those,
really
but-
interesting story because I actually thought she might beat all the charges, because she's slick and she's smart, and she did really, really well before the walls came tumbling down.
Yeah, no,
So-
she got caught. She got caught good.
And
I know you guys were talking about, and you were like, "Oh, she's gonna get off," and I was like, "She's not gonna get off." And so I was really happy when I saw she was guilty, and I could be like, "I told you."
Yeah, because
My little corner.
there's the interesting thing in the book too is Schultz's grandson worked there. I think it was Schultz.
His grandson's one of the whistleblowers.
Yes,
Yeah.
and his parents thought they were going to have to sell their house to pay for his legal help, because they were going to just throw him
Well,
to
and it
the
was
wolves.
interesting too because his grandfather picked Elizabeth and the company
Yes.
over his grandson.
Yeah, and the mom and dad supported the son, and really back to the wall kind of thing with the money, because none of these people I think were really poor,
Not.
But so it was interesting that he ended up getting.
Yeah, but I do really like that book, Bad Blood. I think it reads really well too, not like a traditional nonfiction can, where some of them are so dry you just sort of.
Yeah, and it's not a business book. It's more of a.
I even felt like the science part of it, where they're talking about how the machines could work, and the different parts of the different tests, I thought that was really easy to understand for myself.
Yeah, I did too, because I am no science geek.
Oh yeah,
so,
no, I'm not either.
So I found the book really interesting, and the question that kept popping up in my mind is, I can't believe she's getting away with this. And yet nobody asked the hard questions.
Nobody wanted to know.
Nobody wanted, that's really true. Everyone wanted to believe in the miracle and the hope and Elizabeth led the band. And
She did.
so if you're looking for an interesting book that has ties to current times, Bad Blood.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually downloaded it because my mom was asking questions about it. And so I said, here, read it. Then, because she wanted to know why we thought that Elizabeth deserved to get the book thrown at her.
Yeah.
And so
I think I read that about 2 years ago. I think I actually talked about it at one point a while back, but I can't remember. If I have to remember every book I read, I'm in trouble.
Oh, we'd be in trouble, both of us. But so if you're looking for a good book that's interesting, I would highly recommend this, and you would too.
Yeah, I did, and I do. So yeah, I've been kind of reading some lighter stuff as the new year started, and so I started a new Cozy Mysteries series. And it's the Bake Shop Mysteries, and they're by Ellie Alexander. And the first one is called Meet Your Baker.
I like that.
So these take place in, the name of the bake shop is called Tort.
Ooh.
And the book is set in Ashland, Oregon, which is where there's a big Oregon Shakespeare Festival every year.
Okay.
And so she's grown up in this Shakespeare town. And so she comes home after breaking up with her husband to help her mom in their bake shop. And she comes into work one morning, and there is jam all over the floor. And goes around the corner, and there's a dead body.
Of course.
The new member of the board of directors of the theater company has had her head bashed in with a jar of jam. Which sounds awful.
And since we are both on a board of
yes,
a
we are
theater
both
company,
on a theater board. I thought it was very interesting, and I can understand the feeling sometime. But so it's her adjusting to being back home and figuring out what the deal is. But I mean, the people that work in there's a lot of interesting characters in this book. The people that work in her and her mother have an interesting dynamic, and then you have the police detective they call the professor, because he's always spouting out Shakespeare quotes as he's solving. And there's also I think his name was Thomas, who was the love interest left behind when she went off to travel. So all your usual. The only thing that wasn't in this book is there's no pet.
Oh.
Nobody has a pet yet. Usually all these cozy mysteries, they've got a cat or a dog or some kind of little animal running around. And this one doesn't have one so far. But this one, since it takes place in a bake shop cafe, again, they are always cooking.
Yes.
So I was so hungry through this whole book.
Do they have recipes?
Yes, they do. At the end of the book, there were recipes. So, and some of them looked good. Most of them I can kind of since I can't have gluten, I can sort of be like, oh, I can't make that, or oh, it'd be too much to figure it out. But some of them, it's like, oh, this is a salad that looks really, really good. I should make this. But so that was the first one, Meet Your Baker. I think they all have got pretty great titles. The next one is A Batter of Life and Death.
Oh, that's good.
On Thin Icing. Caught Bread-Handed. A Crime of Passion Fruit.
It would be fun to come up with those.
But this one, I mean, I started it, and then I was like, oh, look, there's 15 of these.
That's always fun.
Donut Disturb. That's my favorite
that.
one. Like we've talked about in the past, I think it would be really fun to have a job of figuring out all the different names for all the cozy mysteries.
Yeah, because there's a lot of recipe mysteries now.
Yes.
Where it used to be just a real rare thing, and then all of a sudden it kind of exploded. I think like any.
Well, and I like the cozy mysteries too, just because I can pick it up and you can kind of figure out. This one I didn't figure out who did it, which I liked, because some of them you figure it out at least like 30 pages before the main character figures it out, and you're like, okay, when are they going to try to knock the detective off, because that's coming at some point here.
Yep.
So that was interesting. But it was really good. I'd never read anything by Ellie Alexander. So, yeah.
Well, I am just going to start the third book in a series, and this is a mystery series, and it's by P.J. Fitzsimmons, and the first one is called The Case of the Canterfell Codicil. And you're introduced to the protagonist. His name is Auntie Boys Jolie. And he's sort of a man about town, you know, he's sort of a dip. He's smart, but he's also sort of a dip, you know. And the book was interesting because he figured out how the will was rigged.
Oh, yeah.
And he's a fun character. And the second one, and I got this through Kindle Unlimited.
Okay.
I would never have found him, I don't think. Or maybe I never should have found him. And the second one is pretty good because it's about it's Christmas and somebody gets murdered, and there's only tracks leading up to the murder. There's no tracks leading away from the murder. And it's because the murderer stepped into the tracks when he backed.
They didn't fly.
No.
They weren't still in the house.
Auntie figured that one out. And now there's a third one, and it's it has Auntie's dragged to his friend's house. And there were two great uncles who lived together, and they hated each other, but neither would move because they wouldn't give the satisfaction to the other one.
Yes.
And so whichever uncle survived, that branch of the family got all the money. So Auntie is brought in because the two brothers had a duel and shot each other, and the coroner refuses to say who died first. So Auntie has to figure this out so that they can figure out who gets the money.
Oh, gosh.
And I thought it was a pretty good twist on things. I've just started it, though.
Oh,
so
good.
that one's kind of fun. And then I just finished reading one of my favorite authors, George Ballars. He's English, wrote 40s, 50s, 60s. And this one is called The Corpse at the Carnival. And it takes place in the Isle of Man, which is off the English coast. And the Inspector Littlejohn is going there for a vacation. And the poor man never gets a break because, of course,
it's a bad time when you want to go on vacation. You're a police inspector.
He goes to stay with his friend, the deacon. And the deacon's housekeeper, Maggie, just has a fit because every time Little John shows up, then the chief of police shows up, and there's a body, and she doesn't get to feed any of these people anymore, and off she goes. And so the fellow was found knifed in the middle of the carnival. And so what's interesting about this book is that this fellow that was found, his name was Frank Snook. Okay. But he was sort of a down and outer. But he actually was really wealthy. He just hated his wife so much, she up and left her one day. And took up with another woman who drove him crazy too, so he up and left her. But he always leaves a bunch of money behind, so eventually he doesn't have any money. He's got like a little bit. Yeah. So he ends up at the Isle of Man, living in this nasty little boarding house, but just hanging out, having a good time. But he cannot stay away from women. And so he ends up having sort of a convoluted relationships, and Little John and Inspector Nell are trying to figure this all out. And they're all sort of, they're married and they're sort of stodgy. Yeah. And they just can't quite get over this man and all his cavorting. So that one was particularly, I really like all of George Ballars' books, but a lot of them are now available through Kindle Unlimited. Okay. And so they are good to read, and I don't know if you can actually get the hardcovers. I think you can probably buy them on Amazon, but they'd be spendy. Okay. But they're good, and that one was a good one. I actually couldn't I think I read it a long time ago, but I couldn't remember who did it. Okay. And so I had to keep reading it to figure it out. And I did not really figure it out till the end. So it was a good.
It's kind of fun sometimes. I mean, some of them you start reading and you're like, well, you did it.
Yeah. Well,
let's see how many pages it takes the author to the rest of everybody else to figure it out.
There was a young woman in the book, and I really hope Susie wasn't guilty because I really kind of liked her. And I thought, oh, this is going to be one of those. At the end, Susie will be guilty as heck. But she wasn't, so I'm very happy about that.
Well, that's good.
I just downloaded a book too, today actually, before I came here. It's a new one. It's called Move. And it's a nonfiction. It's called How the New Science of Body Movement Can Set Your Mind Free. And how the relationship between body movement and brain.
Yeah.
And it said even the most minimal movement, which is pretty much what I would do, is supposed to help. So I'm actually going to read this so I can report on this in a future episode.
Oh, good. And on that note, we've reached the end of our time this week.
Wow.
So if you've got anything you want us to read in this new year, reach out to us in our email, offtheshelfbooktalk@gmail.com, or through Instagram and Facebook, and we will see you next time.